I had waited for this day for so long. My son Daniel was finally coming home after 3 extended years serving in the army. That day remains etched in my memory with absolute clarity. The soft morning sunlight filtered warmly through the windows as I busied myself preparing the house, tidying every corner, while my heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He had left as a young man full of ambition and a desire to serve, and now he was returning more mature, more assured of himself. I couldn't help but wonder how much he had transformed during his time away. When Daniel finally crossed the threshold, his appearance struck me immediately. He looked older, more serious. His hair was cropped shorter, his face leaner, with a sharpness to his features. There was a calm strength in the way he carried himself that caught me off guard. Yet, as soon as his eyes met mine, his expression softened and his arms opened wide. I rushed to embrace him, overcome by a surge of warmth as he pulled me close, holding me tighter and longer than I had expected. My chest filled with joy, tears welling in my eyes. He was home, safe at last. In the following days, Daniel and I spent long hours reconnecting. He recounted stories from his training, shared details about the people he'd met and the distant places he'd seen. He confided in me more openly than ever before, speaking about fears and challenges that had shaped him during his service. There was a depth in his words, a somber intensity in his eyes, and a focus in the way he looked at me that was new. Initially, I dismissed it as part of his adjustment to civilian life, after years of limited comfort and emotional distance. But as days turned into weeks, subtle shifts in our relationship became impossible to ignore. He lingered near me often, always finding reasons to stay close, whether helping with chores or sitting with me during late-night cups of tea. His laughter sounded deeper, his eyes warmer, and sometimes I felt as though he was seeing something in me I couldn't quite identify. I'd catch him watching me from the corner of his eye, his gaze lingering a moment too long before he looked away, as though perceiving me in a way I hadn't expected. One evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, he offered to dry the dishes while I washed. We settled into a peaceful rhythm, the only sound the steady flow of water. Then he spoke, his voice unusually gentle, almost hesitant. "Mom," he began, pausing briefly, "it's strange being back. Everything's so familiar, yet it feels like I don't belong anymore." I glanced at him, noticing his furrowed brow and the pensive set of his mouth. "It takes time," I replied softly. "It's a big adjustment coming home after all you've experienced." He nodded, his features relaxing slightly, but then his words faltered again. "It's not just being back here, but—" His voice trailed off as his eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, something unspoken seemed to hang between us. We held each other's gaze too long, and I felt a small, uncomfortable flutter in my chest. The way he was looking at me felt different, deeper, almost searching, as though he was holding back emotions he couldn't quite express. I forced a gentle smile to break the tension. "It'll take us both some time to adjust, but I'm here for you, Danny, always." He offered a small, tight-lipped smile, tinged with sadness, and nodded, stepping back as he finished drying his hands. Yet the weight of those unspoken feelings lingered heavily between us. As days passed, I continued noticing subtle shifts in his behavior that only added to my unease. Daniel seemed to withdraw more, as if struggling with words he couldn't voice. He had always been a physically affectionate child, but now his hugs felt different. Longer, his hands lingering as he held me close. His eyes often searched mine with a look I couldn't quite define. One evening, we watched an old movie together, a childhood favourite of his. It had been so long since we'd shared a quiet moment like that, and nostalgia filled me as I glanced over at him, wondering where the years had gone. He must have sensed my gaze because he turned, his expression warm and tender. "It's nice being here with you, Mom," he murmured, his hand gently finding mine on the couch. His thumb brushed lightly across my knuckles, a simple touch that seemed to carry layers of unspoken emotion. A lump formed in my throat, a wave of emotion catching me off guard. "I'm so glad you're home, sweetheart." "I've missed you so much," I whispered. He squeezed my hand gently, his gaze never leaving mine, and for a heartbeat, the boundary between mother and son felt blurred. There was something else in his eyes, a depth of feeling I wasn't ready to understand. My heart raced, a strange vulnerability overtaking me. I gently withdrew my hand, my cheeks flushing. "I should check on the tea," I murmured, rising from the couch with forced casualness. For a second, Daniel hesitated as though wanting to stop me, but he only nodded, his eyes following me as I walked away. That night, lying in bed, my thoughts spun with confusion and doubt. I questioned whether I had imagined those lingering looks and subtle touches, reminding myself how much he had been through. Perhaps he was simply adjusting, reconnecting after all that time apart. Yet, deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The years apart, the intensity of his experiences, somehow they had stirred emotions between us that neither of us knew how to process. As I lay awake in the quiet of the night, I realized that facing these complicated feelings and navigating the space between us would be far harder than I had ever expected. In just 2 days, Daniel would turn 20. I suggested hosting a celebration for him, inviting numerous guests and preparing a delicious meal. Daniel, however, told me he didn't want anyone else present at his birthday dinner. He preferred it to be just the two of us. I wasn't sure how to react, having assumed he would want friends, perhaps some extended family, or at least a small, quiet gathering. But the sincerity in his eyes was undeniable as he expressed his wish to spend the evening with me alone. The morning of his birthday arrived gently, sunlight streaming through the kitchen window as I busied myself preparing for our night together. I had taken care to ensure every detail was perfect. His favourite dish, a homemade cake, and decorations that, while modest, created a cosy and heartfelt atmosphere. My heart felt a mix of joy and unease. I was determined to make him feel cherished and celebrated. Yet a small voice inside me questioned whether his request for such privacy hinted at something deeper. By the time evening approached, the house seemed to hum with quiet expectancy. I had set the table with candles, the flickering flames casting a glow that felt almost overly intimate. When Daniel finally entered, he paused, his gaze sweeping the room as a soft smile formed on his lips. "Wow, Mom," he whispered, clearly moved. "This is perfect." He stepped closer and embraced me warmly, the hug lingering longer than usual. When I tried to pull back, he held my shoulders gently, his eyes locking onto mine with a depth that sent a tremor through me. "You didn't have to go through all this," he said softly. "I would have been happy just being here with you. But I wanted it to be special," I replied, my voice quiet. "You deserve it." We settled into dinner, conversation flowing easily as we laughed and reminisced about past birthdays. He recalled childhood celebrations, the silly games and surprises I used to organize. I found myself laughing along, grateful to see him relaxed and happy. Yet as the evening unfolded, an unspoken tension lingered between us. Something deeper beneath his expressions and the way he looked at me. After the meal, we moved to the living room, each holding a glass of wine. Daniel leaned back on the couch, watching me with a soft expression that felt both vulnerable and unfamiliar. "Thank you for this, Mom," he murmured, his voice gentle. "It means more than you realize." I felt heat rise to my cheeks, my chest fluttering in a way I tried to dismiss. "You don't need to thank me," I replied just as softly. "It's always been just us." As I spoke those words, I felt their truth more deeply than ever. Over the years, we had become each other's constants, the only ones who truly understood each other. Now, in the dim light, that closeness felt almost palpable, filling the space between us with a weight I hadn't expected. He reached out, his hand brushing mine, the contact sparking something within me that I struggled to suppress. "You have no idea how much I've missed this," he whispered, his thumb gently tracing my hand. Being home, being here with you, my heartbeat quickened, and I felt exposed under the intensity of his gaze, as if he were seeing parts of me I hadn't realized were visible. Words caught in my throat, my composure slipping until I finally whispered, "I've missed you too, more than I can express." His expression softened as he squeezed my hand lightly, his fingers warm against mine. "I don't want things to change," he murmured. "I don't want this feeling to fade." His words stirred something complicated in me, a mixture of love and something unspoken, swirling in my chest. I felt trapped between my role as his mother and the closeness pressing us towards something I couldn't fully understand. Gently, I withdrew my hand, needing a moment to steady myself. "You'll be here a while," I said with forced cheer, trying to lighten the mood. "We'll have plenty of time to catch up." Daniel offered a small, almost melancholy smile, as though he sensed my hesitation. "I know, but sometimes I feel like I need to say it. I need you to know how much you mean to me." His words lingered heavily in the air, carrying more depth than I had anticipated. I looked down, acutely aware of his gaze resting on me, and felt like I was teetering on the edge of something unknown, uncertain whether to retreat or fall. "Daniel," I began softly, searching for the right words, "you know I'm always here for you, no matter what." His expression gentled and he moved closer, reaching up to brush a stray hair from my face. The touch was tender, almost hesitant, and it sent a shiver through me that I couldn't quite hide. His fingers lingered just a heartbeat too long, and I felt my breath catch, the space around us seeming to shrink. "I know," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "That's why I wanted tonight to be just us. You're everything to me." Silence thickened between us, heavy and charged, as I searched his face for familiarity, for something grounding, but all I found was the depth of his gaze, making my pulse race. In that instant, I understood that whatever had shifted between us wasn't going to fade. With care, I placed my hand on his arm, feeling the solid warmth beneath his skin, a reminder that he was still my son. "I'll always be here," I whispered. My voice trembled slightly as I spoke. "That will never change." He nodded, his gaze dropping momentarily while he drew in a deep breath, his hand sliding gently over mine. We remained there, our fingers intertwined, sharing a quiet understanding in the stillness. This closeness was something we both needed. As the night wore on, the candles burned lower, and the house sank into deeper silence. I realized then that our connection had shifted. We had crossed into unfamiliar territory, layered and intricate, yet undeniably tender. After the long evening, I felt the day's weight pressing on me. I glanced at Daniel, still sprawled on the couch, entirely at ease, his attention focused on the movie he had chosen. The warmth of the evening lingered between us, yet I could sense my energy fading, my mind clouded by a subtle tension I couldn't quite place. "Daniel," I murmured, rising from the couch, "I think I'll head to bed. I'm feeling a bit tired." He looked up, his gaze soft and warm. "You can sleep, but stay here," he replied quietly. "I'll keep watching and you can rest next to me. It's your couch after all." The suggestion caught me off guard. We'd shared such a pleasant evening, but the look in his eyes, the hope, the gentle smile that seemed to be asking for something I couldn't quite define, made it difficult to refuse. It was just a movie after all. If being near me mattered to him, maybe I could stay a little longer. "All right," I murmured, sinking back onto the couch and curling my legs up as I leaned into the corner. "But don't blame me if I fall asleep on you." He chuckled softly, shifting slightly closer. For a few moments, we sat in a comfortable silence, the movie flickering on the screen. I felt myself gradually relaxing, the tension within me easing as I tried to quiet the persistent thoughts circling my mind. The room was dim, the only light coming from the television, and as I sat there, I became acutely aware of his quiet breathing nearby, steady and calming, yet charged with something I couldn't name. His arm rested along the back of the couch just behind me, and the warmth radiating from him was both soothing and oddly heightened my awareness of our closeness. As the movie continued, my eyelids grew heavier, the soft sounds of the television and the day's emotions lulling me into a peaceful haze. My head tilted back slightly, brushing his arm as I let my eyes close, surrendering to the comfort of the moment. Just as I was beginning to drift off, I felt him shift. His arm moved ever so slightly until his fingertips grazed my shoulder in the faintest touch. The contact was delicate, barely there, yet it sent a shiver through me, pulling me back to full awareness. My heart skipped, and I opened my eyes, glancing up at him. He was already watching me, his expression quietly intense. "Sorry," he murmured softly, voice close. "I didn't mean to wake you." I swallowed, pulse quickening. "It's okay, I wasn't really asleep yet." He didn't draw back, his arm still resting there. We sat in a thickening silence, something unspoken lingering in the air between us. I felt it in the closeness of his hand, the way his eyes held mine, yet I couldn't bring myself to move away, even when instinct whispered that I should. "It's been so nice being here with you," he said gently, his gaze unwavering. "I've missed this, missed us." A lump formed in my throat. My voice caught, unable to rise past the strange fluttering in my chest. "I missed you too, Danny." For a long moment, we simply looked at each other, the space between us feeling both vast and impossibly close. His hand shifted slightly, his fingers brushing along my arm, in a small, innocent gesture that felt far heavier than it should have. The warmth it sent through me made me wonder if he felt it too. I should really go to bed," I whispered, my voice unsteady. "It's been a long day." His gaze softened as he nodded. "I understand, but maybe we could do this again sometime?" A tentative smile formed on my lips. "I'd like that." As I rose from the couch, I could still feel the lingering warmth of his touch on my shoulder, a sensation that stayed with me long after I left the room. And as I closed the door to my bedroom, the quiet echo of his presence seemed to follow, filling the darkness with a quiet comfort, and the whisper of something more. A feeling that stayed with me as I drifted into sleep, uncertain of what tomorrow might bring.